Chapter 1, Section 6, Types of Variables. Some general definitions. A variable is a characteristic or property that can take on different values. A constant is a characteristic or property that can take on only one value. They give you two sets of tables, table 1.1 or 1.2, that gives example of what a constant is. Discrete or continuous variables. A discrete variable is a variable that consists of isolated numbers separated by gaps. So some examples of a discrete variable would include most counts, such as the number of children in a family, but never 1/2 in spite of how you might occasionally feel about a sibling. So halves don't exist, just a whole. A continuous variable is a variable that consists of numbers whose values, at least in theory, have no restriction. So this can have halves. So this can have any decimal place you can think of. Approximate numbers are numbers that help round off continuous variables, since in theory continuous variables can be carried out infinitely far. So the definition for approximate numbers are numbers that are rounded off, as is always the case with values for continuous variables. And I give you some examples of some approximate numbers. And if you want to become better at discrete and continuous variables, in Progress Check 1.5, they give you some some things that you have to tell whether they're discrete or continuous. And the answers are on page 498. So next we have independent and dependent variables. And this part talks about studies and experiments. An experiment is a study in which the investigator decides who receives the special treatment. And when well-designed experiments yield the most informative and ambiguous conclusions about cause and effect relationships. So then we go to an independent variable, which is the treatment manipulated by the investigator in an experiment. So the impartial creation of distinct groups which differ only in terms of independent variable has most desirable consequence. Once the data has been collected and difference between groups can be interpreted as being caused by the independent variable. Then we have dependent variable, which is a variable that is believed to have been influenced by the independent variable. So unlike the independent variable, the dependent variable isn't manipulated by the investigator. Instead, it represents the outcome, the data produced by the experiment. So independent is manipulated by the investigator, where dependent is not manipulated. Then we have observational study. An observational study is a study that focuses on detecting relationships between variables, not manipulated by investigators. So it yields less clear-cut conclusions about cause-effect relationships than does an experiment. So an example, couples already possessing high active listening scores might also tend to be more seriously committed to each other, and this more serious commitment itself cause both the higher active listening score and fewer breakdowns in communication. In this case, any special training in active listening without regard to the existing degree of a couple's commitment would not reduce the number of breakdowns in communication. Then we go down to confounding variable. Whenever groups differ, not just because of the independent variable, also because some uncontrolled variable covaries with the independent variable. Any conclusion about a cause-effect relationship is suspect. If instead of random assignment, each couple in an experiment is free to choose whether to undergo special training in active listening or to be in less demanding control group, any conclusion must be qualified. For instance, couples willing to devote extra effort to special training might already possess a deeper commitment that co-varies with more active listening skills. An uncontrolled variable that compromises the interpretation of a study is known as confounding variable. You can avoid confounding variables, as in the present case, by assigning subjects randomly to various groups in the experiment, and also by standardizing all experimental conditions other than the independent variable for subjects in both groups. So here is just a figure. In figure 1.3, it shows the independent and dependent variable in experiment with a treatment group and a control group. And here is some little exercises in progress check 1.6 for experiment or observational study. So you have to pick whether it's experiment or observational study. And that is it.